If there is one player in the history of football whom fans of all ages and locations call the king of this discipline, it is certainly Pele. The only man on earth to have won 3 world championships and the only one whose name is still held in such high esteem. More than 30 years have passed since he ran on the pitch, during which we could admire many other outstanding players, and yet his name is still shrouded in such great legend. We've heard about Pele's successors many times over the last quarter of a century, but just how good was Pele himself? Why is he still called the king of football? When talking about Pele, it is difficult to separate facts from myths. Everyone says he's the best player in history. The scorer of the legendary number of 1,283 goals. Without a doubt, Pele was the greatest figure in Brazilian football, the king of his time and the football Einstein of the 1960s and 1970s. From today's perspective, it's hard not to notice that at least some part of the myth of the great Pele is a bit of mythology. He was born like most Brazilian football stars in a poor family as Edson Arantes do Nascimento, named after the American inventor Thomas Edison. The nickname Pele, as we know him today, was given to him by his friends during his school days, and it comes from the nickname of Bila, a teammate of Pele's father, who was the first football idol of the future football star when she could not even pronounce the word correctly.
Many people don't know my real name because it's a very long name. It's Edson Arantes do Nascimento.
Interestingly, Pele himself initially hated this nickname, which in his opinion sounded terrible and was in no way comparable to the name given in honor of the great inventor. Once he even beat up his classmate for calling him Pele, but other children, seeing how irritated he was by this term, started using it even more often out of anger. Fortunately, Pele quickly came to terms with this situation, not knowing that years later the whole world would fall to its knees at the sound of this word. I have already mentioned that Pele's father played football himself, and he was his first coach at a time when he used socks stuffed with newspapers as cleats. Initially, young Pele played for several amateur teams, but he gained his first greater fame and interest in the local football community while playing indoor football, which was gaining popularity throughout Brazil at that time. This is how he caught the attention of Santos coaches, to whom in 1956, at the age of less than 16, he was taken by former Brazilian representative and then his coach Waldemar de Brito. Edson immediately impressed the local coaches and not only immediately signed his first professional contract, but also made his debut in the senior team when he was still only 15 years old. In his debut, he immediately scored his first goal. Both his club and national team debut, because only a year later, he also found recognition in the eyes of the then Canarinhos coach, and his premiere appearance in the characteristic yellow shirt took place in a prestigious friendly match against Argentina, lost 2-1, and he scored the honorary goal for the Canaries. This was enough for his fame to reach far beyond Sao Paulo. Today, we would say that the local media hailed him as the new Pele, but he was the first and only Pele, before whom no other footballer in the world had become such an iconic figure. He needed only a few matches to find a permanent place in Santos' starting 11, a club that, largely thanks to him, dominated the next 25 years in the history of Brazilian and South American football. As football tactical thought was still in its early stages of development at that time, players like him were simply positioned at the front. Despite the number 10 on his shirt, he played in various positions, but most often, following the example of his father, as a center forward, for which he was ideally suited for several reasons. One of them was the speed of decision-making learned from futsal pitches. Another year of training with his father, who played in this position. Finally, a wide range of skills to finish the action with shots over, under, or past the goalkeeper. Despite being only 173 centimeters tall, he was also great with heading, winning aerial duels with defenders taller than him. However, his greatest strength was the ability to so-called anticipation, that is, anticipating the movement of defenders, thanks to which he was always one step ahead of his rival. He spent almost his entire career in one club, which, as I have already mentioned, was the real hegemon of those times, the South American equivalent of, for example, Real Madrid from the Galacticos era. It is no accident that Santos is known today as Santasticos. Between 1959 and 1974, they won a total of 25 trophies, including the equivalent of the European Champions League, the Copa Libertadores, twice. They also won the Intercontinental Cup twice against Portuguese Benfica and Italian Milan, who were winning the European Cup on the other side of the world. Everyone in the world wanted to see in action the man who could outshine Eusebio and unseat Cesare Maldini. And these were the times not only before the era of the internet, but also before widely available television. The interest the Santácicos aroused resulted in many invitations to friendly matches and tournaments at that time. The club became so famous that in 44 days it was able to play 22 matches, visiting 20 cities in 10 different countries. Yet Pele became a global sensation a year before he won anything with Santos. At the 1958 World Cup in Sweden, the then 17-year-old player arrived with a knee injury. Today, a player in such a situation would probably not even be included in the squad for such an important tournament. But at that time, his teammates put pressure on the coach to include Pele on the pitch with them. This is what happened. And with his performance against the Soviet Union in the third match of the group stage, Pele became the youngest player to ever play at the World Cup. He performed so promisingly that in the quarter-final match against Wales, he was in the starting lineup and scored the only winning goal. However, the real show came in the next match, when the Canarinhos defeated France 5-2 in the fight for the final, and 3 goals that evening were scored by none other than 17-year-old Pele. Without slowing down, he completed the formalities in the final, and with another 2 goals contributed to another 5-2 win, this time against the tournament hosts, and as the viceroy of scorers, he secured the title of world champion for his team. Today, Brazil appears to us as a multiple world champion. But back then, their victory in Stockholm in 1958 was their first gold in history, and only started their march to the next 4 titles. That tournament showed the world the full potential of Pele, who became the first global Wonderkid, and subsequent years of his performances only fueled interest in him. It is no wonder that such a performance by such a young player aroused great interest from the largest European clubs, which were already able to attract outstanding players from South America at that time. Supposedly, contract terms have already been agreed with the Italian Inter, but the club and Santos fans blocked the transfer by organizing protest rallies on the streets of the city, which turned his transfer into a matter of state importance. Even President Jânio Quadros got involved, officially recognizing the Brazilian as a national treasure to prevent his sale, and the rest of the world had to be content with watching him every 4 years at the next World Cup, the next 2 of which were completely unsuccessful for him. First in Chile in 1962, where the Brazilians were assured of participation as defending champions. Pele opened the tournament with a goal in the first match against Mexico, but due to an injury against Czechoslovakia, he had to leave the field in the first half and did not play for the rest of the tournament. The Canarinhos won the title. Pele received his second world champion medal, but this was not how he imagined his contribution to achieving that success. 4 years later in England, it was even worse. Pele and his friends fell victim to the brutal play of their rivals, the still lame regulations and helpless referees who allowed football virtuosos from the country of samba to hunt down their legs. Just like in the decisive match against Portugal, which in today's circumstances should have been given a red card by defender João Morais. Instead, Pele, due to his inability to make changes, ended the match limping after one of the Portuguese's brutal entries, and the 2-time world champions were eliminated already at the group stage. After that match, 25-year-old Pele swore that he would never take part in a FIFA World Cup tournament again. Fortunately for himself, the fans and the whole of Brazil, he changed his mind and appeared on the Mexican pitch in 1970, just before his 30th birthday. It was the first World Cup to have global coverage thanks to a color television broadcast that could be watched by viewers around the world. Millions of fans in many places around the world could finally experience the myth of the great Pele with their own eyes for the first time in their lives. Before anyone heard of Neymar, Ronaldinho, or Ronaldo, Pele was the first Brazilian who introduced the world to Joga Bonito, that is, joyful football, In Mexico, Brazil won the third World Cup, and Pele, next to Jairzinho, was the brightest star of the Golden 11, scoring 3 goals in the group stage, adding one of the goals in the grand final against Italy, and recording as many as 6 assists on his teammates' goals, which is still unbeaten to this day. After the final match, Pele's marking officer Tarcisio Bergnic said, "Before the match, I kept telling myself that he was a human being just like us. I was wrong." Out of 4 World Cups, Pele brought home a total of 3 gold medals. At the beginning of the episode, I mentioned that the cult of Pele had an element of mythology to it. It was cited for many years by the footballer and his entourage that he scored a total of 1,283 goals in his career, which would make him the most effective goal scorer in the history of football. Many accepted this number as an official statistic. Meanwhile, the chronicles contain information about 767 goals in 812 official matches. This means that 40% of all his goals came in friendly matches and tournaments. Of course, even taking into account only goals scored in official matches, Pele can boast an incredible effectiveness of close to 1 goal per match. His shooting achievements are extraordinary, but many people resented him and felt cheated, accusing him of trying to increase his statistics. Of course, some of this nearly half of unofficial goals took place in matches against weaker rivals, and sometimes simply amateurs, such as against teams like the Brazilian Coast Guard. However, many of these matches, despite their friendly nature, were against top clubs and national teams. It is necessary to take into account the fact that in those days, football games were not as developed as they are today. Currently, clubs and national teams have the opposite problem, which is an overpacked calendar of matches in various club and national team competitions. In those years, the best teams wanting to face rivals from other parts of the world, either for financial or purely sporting reasons, went on tour to other countries, playing many exhibition matches. For example, on the Old Continent, Pele scored a total of 145 goals in 130 matches against clubs from 16 different European countries. He especially liked shooting against Italian teams, for which he scored a total of 41 goals. In turn, their German rivals had to score 29 times in 19 attempts to compete with Pele. In Europe, where he only appeared as a guest player, never wearing the shirt of any European club, unlike the next great Brazilians, whom the world admired in the following years. This fact is largely responsible for the fact that Pele's showcase, apart from the fantastic achievement of winning the World Cup 3 times with Brazil, and taking into account team trophies, contains almost exclusively those won in the Brazilian League competitions and cups. Almost, because it is a chronicler's duty to mention the United States Championship with the New York Cosmos won in 1977, after he interrupted his retirement to promote football in the USA, initiating the appearance of the biggest world-class stars in the local league. Therefore, we should appreciate even more the fact that not being a player of any of the European powers, and therefore not playing in the most prestigious European competitions, he managed to achieve such a position in the minds of fans around the world. Pele was hosted by the Pope and heads of state. His trips abroad resembled visits of the biggest pop culture stars, and during a friendly match played in Nigeria because of him, a 48-hour ceasefire during the ongoing civil war there was established because of him. As befits the king of football, he ended his career not once, like most players, but twice. First on July 18, 1971, when he was only 31 years old at the Maracana, where he had scored his debut goal against Argentina almost exactly 14 years earlier. 140,000 Canarinhos fans drowned in a sea of tears during the match against Yugoslavia, saying goodbye to their greatest player in the history of Brazil, who until today, he scored the most goals for them and gave them the most joy. After saying goodbye to fans at his home 6 years later, he hung up his boots for good, saying goodbye to the entire football world. On October 1st, 1977, in a huge benefit match between Santos and New York Cosmos, the only 2 clubs he ever played for, he played half of the match for both teams. This event was broadcast all over the world, and its highlight was the goal of the beneficiary himself, scored from a free kick from almost 30 meters, which was also the last goal in his wonderful career. a career that was an inspiration for the next generations of Brazilians. That's it for this episode. Thank you very much for watching until the end. If you liked the video, leave a thumbs up. I encourage you to subscribe. Thanks for watching. We'll hear from you in the next episode.